This is a notes video for the Algebra 2 blended class. These notes, this is the intro lesson for domain and range. So we're going to do a review of inequalities and interval notation. So let's start by filling in the blanks here. Under the definition of inequality, it says when graphing inequalities, we're going to use an open dot when the inequality says greater than or less than. So an open dot looks like this. It's just a little open circle. And then we're going to use a closed dot, which looks like this. It's all filled in when the inequality is the greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. So when the lines are underneath, you're going to use a closed dot. Okay, so then interval notation. We're going to review both. When the inequality is a less than or a greater than, we're going to use parentheses on the constant number. So that tells us that the constant is not included in the solution. When it's a less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, you're going to use square brackets on the number. This tells you that the value is included in the solution. Now, one thing to make sure of is when you use infinity or negative infinity, you are always going to use parentheses. Never ever use square brackets when you're talking about infinity on your intervals. Finally, interval notation is always written from, I'm going to write underneath here, the small number to the big number as you read from left to right or bottom to top. So let's jump in and talk about what is interval notation and what are the inequalities. So example 1 in A, it says x is greater than or equal to 4. Because we have a greater than or equal to, just like we talked about in that box above, we're going to put a closed dot at 4. Then you have to think about where the x's or the other numbers are greater than 4. Well, all the numbers are greater than 4 out to the right. So you're going to shade in the right side of your graph. Now, when we write interval notation, we're going to match it up to our number line from left to the right end. So on the left end, I have an endpoint at 4. That endpoint has a closed dot, and we said the closed dots here go with the inequality symbols less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. And down below, we said that those symbols use square brackets. So you're going to put a square bracket around that 4. Then your interval is going to infinity on the right. As you move to the right, you go to infinity. So you do comma infinity, and you always put a parenthesis with infinity. Now, the next one says x is less than 5. So since it's a less than symbol, you're going to use an open dot at 5. And all the x's are less than 5 to the left. So you shade your number 9 to the left. Now this time, when you do your interval, you start on the left. There's an arrow on the left, which means that that arrow is going towards negative infinity. With negative infinity, you put a parenthesis for your interval notation. The number that we go up to on the right is 5. That's as far right as you go. It has an open circle, so you're going to put in parentheses. When I look at the next two, this one looks a little tricky. It says negative 4 is less than x. Sometimes that is hard to figure out if you're shading left or right. So I want to rewrite this here. I want to rewrite it so that the x is on the left of the negative 4. But we need to figure out what inequality symbol goes next to the x. It goes in between. So when I look here, notice it has this inequality symbol, the less than. And the big side of the inequality is next to the x. So when I write it over here, I'm going to flip that symbol so the big side of the inequality is also next to the x. So that inequality x is greater than negative 4 is the exact same thing that we started with. Here we're going to put an open dot at negative 4 because we have a greater than. And all the numbers that are greater are over to the right. Now writing your interval here, I have an open dot at negative 4. Negative 4 is on the left. Open dot means I get a parenthesis. And then the arrow on the right means you are going to positive infinity, which also gets a parenthesis. All right, in D, we also need to rewrite this one. So let's start here. We put the x on the left, the 6 on the right. Notice this time that the small part of the inequality is next to the x. So we're going to rewrite it so the small part of the inequality is next to the x here. That inequality now says x is less than or equal to 6. That's equivalent to what you started with. Less than or equal to gets a closed dot. And because it's less than or equal to, we're going to shade to the left. To write your interval here, you start looking at the left. There's an arrow on that side. That arrow goes to negative infinity. We put a parenthesis with negative infinity, and we go all the way up to this dot at 6. It's a closed dot, so you put a square bracket. All right, next example here. Now we're given a number line. We need to write the inequality and our interval notation. So to write the inequality, always put the x first, and then we have a dot, a closed dot at 5. The arrow is going to the left, which means we are shading in all the stuff that is less than 5. And since we have a closed dot, it's less than or equal to. The interval notation is the same as last time. The arrow over here, we go left to right. There's an arrow on the left, which means we're going to negative infinity. And all the way to the right, you are stopping at 5. A closed dot gets a square bracket. On this next one, we start with x, and our dot's at negative 1. We need to write the symbol that goes with that x and negative 1. It's open dots, you're going to have either greater or less, and shading to the right, those numbers are all bigger than negative 1, so we're going to do our greater than symbol. To do our interval, we start on the left here with negative 1. It has an open circle, so we put a negative 1. We go all the way to the right forever with an arrow, which means we go to infinity. All right, next one's here. These are compound inequalities. So instead of just one number, we now have 2 numbers to deal with on our number line. So when we graph compound inequalities, here's my strategy. You're going to put a dot at both endpoints. So here I'm going to put a dot at negative 3. I'm going to put a closed dot because I have a less than or equal to. And I'm going to put a closed dot at 5 because I also have a less than or equal to. Now, on this number line, the x is in the middle of the negative 3 and 5. So I'm going to shade in the middle of negative 3 and 5. When you do your interval notation, again, write your endpoints down. I have an endpoint at negative 3, and my shaded region goes all the way up to 5. They both have closed dots, so both of those numbers are going to get a square bracket. On B here, I'm going to put dots on my endpoints. Well, negative 1 is going to get a closed dot because it's less than or equal to. 10 is going to get an open dot because it is a less than. Again, the x is in the middle of the 2 numbers, so you are going to shade in the middle. When you do your interval here, put your endpoints, negative 1 and 10. Now, negative 1 has a closed dot, so you're going to put a square bracket, and 10 has an open dot, so it gets a parenthesis. All right, the next one in C. Negative 6 less than x is less than 4. The negative 6 and 4 are both going to get open dots because they have less than symbols. Negative 6 gets an open dot, 4 gets an open dot. And just like the other problems, the x is in the middle, so you're going to shade in the middle. When you write your endpoints down, negative 6 and 4, since they both have open dots, they're going to get 2 parentheses. All right, 2 more like this. Negative 7 and 3 are my endpoints. Negative 7 gets an open dot because it has a less than symbol. 3 has a closed dot because it has a less than or equal to symbol. And we shade in the middle because the x is in the middle. when you write your interval here, you put your endpoints -7 and 3. -7 has an open dot, so you put a parenthesis, and 3 has a closed dot, so there's bracket. Now this last one looks a little bit different. We have some infinities here. This is -infinity is less than x is less than infinity. So if I'm looking at this one, because I'm going to -infinity, that means I'm going to have an arrow going to the left, and then an arrow going all the way to the right. And the x is in the middle, which means you shade in the entire number line. This is also can be said that this is all real numbers. Any positive number and any negative number is underneath that pink line. So when you do your interval, because you have an arrow on the left, your interval goes to -infinity, and -infinity always gets a parenthesis, and the arrow on the right goes to positive infinity, which also goes to infinity. That is the way you would write all real numbers with interval notation, -infinity to positive infinity. All right, finally here, let's write the interval notation just given the number line. So you need to pay attention to what kind of dots you have. Let's see. The dot on the left here starts at -2, and the dot on the right goes to 7. Those are going to be the two numbers in my interval notation, -2 and 7. Now you just have to watch what kind of brackets and parentheses you use. -2 has a closed dot, so it gets a square bracket. 7 gets a parenthesis. On the next one here, I have two open dots. One of them's at -3, the other one's at 2. So I put my -3 and 2 into my interval notation, and then because they both have open dots, we have two parentheses. The next one here, my dots, they're a little hard to see here. I have a closed dot at 0 and an open dot at 3. Then we're shaded in the middle. So your endpoints here are at 0 to 3. 0 is going to get a square bracket because it has a closed dot. 3 has an open dot, so it's a parenthesis. And lastly, just like we did up here in E, notice that this entire number line is colored in with arrows going in both directions. Well, the arrow on the left is pointing to -infinity, which gets a parenthesis, and the arrow on the right is going to positive infinity, which also gets a parenthesis. All right, that's it for the notes. There is some practice over inequalities, number lines, and interval notation. There will be a video for that practice as well.